Welcome to the Carnivore Cast, a podcast focused on the carnivore diet and lifestyle, with practical advice from successful carnivores, citizen scientists, and top researchers. I'm your host, Scott Meslinski, and I'm here to speak with experts and experienced carnivores to get answers to your biggest and meatiest questions while helping you live your best life as a carnivore. If you enjoy the show, please consider supporting the Carnivore Cast on Patreon. By becoming a patron, you'll help us reach more people and continue to create content on Carnivore. There are also exclusive perks available, such as private Q&As, consultations with me, and more. Become a supporter at patreon.com/carnivorecast. Check the episode description for the link. Thank you, and I'll see you there. Marty Kendall is a brilliant engineer who helps you empower people through evidence-based nutrition, research, and technology to optimize their nutrition for their individual goals. Marty has taught me a ton over the years, and he's always producing fantastic work and tools to help people, from his thorough research-driven blog posts to his Nutrient Optimiser app and masterclass and groups to his new book. He's absolutely amazing when it comes to deeply understanding diet and how micro and macronutrients affect us in terms of satiety, fat loss, energy, and more. And one last thing I'll say about Marty is I think he does such a phenomenal job bridging the gap between people more on the keto or carnivore side, as well as people on more traditional, if it fits your macros or high carb or bodybuilding style diets as well. It seems like you've garnered respect from people all over the dietary spectrum. And I think that speaks volumes to your approach. So welcome to the show, Marty.
Hey, thanks, Scott. Great introduction. Very generous. Thank you. Great to be here. Great to talk to your audience.
Awesome. Well, Marty, I'd love to start with, a little bit of your personal story. What first got you into studying nutrition more closely? Because you don't have an educational background in nutrition, correct?
No, I'm an engineer by day and just curious, I suppose. So and motivated. My wife Monica has type 1 diabetes, so I suppose that started me down the rabbit hole of trying to understand nutrition and how to dial in insulin and carbohydrates and all those sorts of things to initially, have kids, which was like 15 years ago. And since then, it's been a continual refinement. And personally, I've got a family history of type 2 diabetes and obesity, and grew up in a vegetarian, religiously vegetarian household. So, a bit like Ted Naiman from that background. And so I've seen both sides, and just continually trying to optimize quantitatively, and fell down the rabbit hole of keto and low carb and all of that thing, all those sorts of things. And so many beliefs and so many things that people are really passionate about, but some of them worked, some of them didn't work for me. So I wanted to quantify it to make it work for my wife, my family, my kids, and myself. And then started blogging and sharing it, and more questions come up, and you meet more smart people, and you learn new things and incorporate that into your system. And my goal is to, I suppose, initially angry in a way that when you see the benefits that can come from nutrition for people like wife Monica, to say, why isn't this information out there? Let's put it out there in a concise, applicable way that will really help people move forward. So it's been a really fun journey.
Yeah, and I've loved following along your journey through the years. Can you talk about sort of some of the stages of your journey? And feel free to take your time with this. How did it go from looking at nutrient dense foods to the Nutrient Optimiser tool, and then on from there?
So initially stumbled across, I was a fan of Jason Fung in the early days, and he was talking about insulin, which is really relevant to type 1 diabetes and managing type 1 diabetes. And I came across the concept of insulin load and the insulin index of food, which is a work done in 1997, University of Sydney. They looked at the insulin response of different people to different foods, and thought you could analyze the data better. So I sort of downloaded their data and crunched the numbers and worked out some formulas to try and calculate the insulin response to food. But then you realize that the lowest insulin foods have, are basically refined fat. And then I'd been in the Rob Wolf paleo headspace, and Matt Lalonde had been talking about nutrient density back then and quantifying. I thought, hey, we can smash together this data on insulin index and nutrient density to try and get a better blend of the two. Like my day job is multi-criteria analysis and trying to go, do we invest in the motorway here or the motorway here or the bike path here or here, and that sort of thing. So multi-criteria analysis was sort of something that I knew how to do, and it made sense to me. So combined insulin index and nutrient density to say, well, if you're diabetic, then let's try and get more stable blood sugars. But if you're not necessarily needing to manage your blood sugars and get a lower insulin load, then how do we, you don't need such a low satiety, high fat approach. You might want to go for more of a nutrient dense approach. And then later on, we, I suppose after developing Nutrient Optimiser, we came to the point where we had a whole lot of data. We stumbled across a bunch of MyFitnessPal data, 500,000 days of that. And then we've got 90,000 days of micronutrient and macronutrient data from people using Nutrient Optimiser, and we've been able to mine that to understand satiety of macronutrients and micronutrients. And so just using the insights from that to look at what helps people to eat less without having to track everything, or even for someone like yourself who's trying to get bigger and stronger, or who is an athlete, how do you allow those people to eat more food while still getting nutrients at the same time, and which levers are the most powerful to pull to get that. So that's been a whole lot of fun. And then I was doing all these analysis with a manual spreadsheet that was taking me a couple of hours per person. I'd take their chronometer food log and say which foods and meals are going to help you dial in your nutrient density to align with your goals with greater satiety or to stabilize blood sugars. And then Alex Zotov came along and said, hey, I can help you program it. That was about 2.5 years ago. And since then, we've just been trying to systematize it more and make it easier and gamify nutrition to the point where it's a fun game where you try to get points and move along progressively from where you are, not just jump from zero to hero, but sort of take that journey and lead people through the steps. And we've got a masterclass which teaches people to dial in micronutrients at a higher level. But just trying to take something that seems so obvious to say, how do you get more nutrients in the food you eat, and make that more accessible for more people.
Yeah, and I remember reading through the Facebook posts in your group back in the good old days of like Andy Mant and Louis Villaseñor competing against each other and other people, seeing who could get the highest Nutrient Optimiser score.
And try to gamify it and make it competitive has been really interesting, and seeing the links that people go to get to the top of the leaderboard. And it's really, really cool thing to compete for. And and you don't just go, well, here's a named diet of, vegan or paleo or carnivore or keto. And like, that just means so many things to so many different people. But, you need food that has enough energy and enough nutrients. And it's really cool to see how different people achieve that.
Yeah. And can you talk a little bit about like what on how you're quantifying it? Like what makes a diet nutrient dense? Like how would you assess a diet for nutrient density according to some of the metrics you use?
Yeah. So nutrient density is basically the amount of nutrients per calorie. So you basically need the basic premise of it is that you need enough nutrients without excessive energy. So the way we quantify it, we initially were looking at the recommended daily intake, but like everybody's aware, there's a lot of shortcomings of that. So we used the data from 90,000 days of people using Nutrient Optimiser to work out the point at which adding more nutrients doesn't tend to give you any more benefits. So you can see some people are, megadosing with vitamin B1 or whatever, and that doesn't provide any additional satiety benefit. But there's definitely a benefit in potassium, magnesium, all the amino acids, omega-3. You see a point where you seem to crave more of the foods that contain those nutrients, but you get to a point where that stabilizes out and you don't get any additional benefits. So we termed that the optimal nutrient intake, and that tends to be like 3 to 5 times greater than the recommended daily intake to prevent diseases of deficiency. So we sort of reset the bar a whole lot higher, but if you can get 100% of our optimal nutrient intake across the board for 34 essential nutrients, which is vitamins, minerals, amino acids, and omega-3, then you get a score of 100. But, most people are sitting at 50 or 60 just eating their normal diet. But once you get higher and higher in the nutrient density score, you're able to get more nutrients per calorie. Satiety kicks in, and you're able to eat a lot less just instinctively without having to control it. And those foods tend to be very a lower energy density and very high satiety and very hard to overeat. They don't contain a lot of refined fats or refined carbs. They're just, plenty of protein and plenty of nutrients. And they tend to be, if you're using a non-carnivore approach, they're a good chunk of fiber as well, which is hard to overeat. They're just natural whole foods that when you look at what they look like, you go, okay, that probably looks like what most people would consider a healthy diet.
Yeah, definitely. And it's been amazing to see like some of the recipes people develop and the ways in which they discover, like, because you would think to do well on this, one thing that was like kind of a light bulb moment for me is you would have to be eating like a very small serving of every vegetable under the sun. But then people would post recipes back in the Keto Gains days before I was carnivore. They'd be like, hey guys, I discovered that like a 2-egg omelet with half a cup of egg whites and spinach and some mushrooms gets me to like this super high score. Or like, you add just like one ingredient to that and you're already meeting like a ton of different nutrient requirements because you've got the eggs, you've got the protein, you've got the spinach. So I thought that was a really interesting insight that you like. Usually the people who are doing really, really well, like close to 100%, they were eating a huge diversity of vegetables. But even some of the people who, at least on some of the recipes, like simplified down to like 4 ingredients, could get really nutrient dense foods.
Yeah, and they're definitely like the animal seafood proportion of it. It's from a calorie point of view, it's 60 or 70%, but from a volume point of view, it may look like a lot of plant-based foods with your spinach or whatever people choose to add to get those fine-tune their minerals. But it's a primarily animal-based food type approach from where are you getting your calories from?
Yeah, I think the recipe was like a tin of sardines, 3 eggs, and spinach or something.
Seafood definitely tends to help round it out as well. Yeah.
And like just a question that always comes up for me, and I'm sure a lot of my listeners will be asking is, do you think it's a problem that a lot of your work on nutrient optimization revolves around, the RDAs and upholding them when we know that a lot of them are flawed or based on, assumptions? Sean Baker says all the time, the lowest level of available evidence, which is like expert opinion rather than RCTs or anything like that. And same question kind of flipped on its head around the actual nutrient data in foods. So for instance, Amber O'Hearn talks all about how beef is said to have no vitamin C, but again, that was assumed. And when you look at certain studies that actually analyze like a pound of ground beef, it has a large amount or a sufficient amount of vitamin C. So what do you think about that?
Well, definitely an interesting question and a useful thought. And we need to acknowledge that, like, the RDAs are based on the minimum to prevent diseases of deficiency, and how do you determine that? It's really, there's not a lot of science, and a lot of the time they actually round it down even further rather than the optimal amount. But like I said before, we've tried to look at what is sort of an optimal target, and rather thinking of, do you need 300 milligrams or 500 milligrams or 100 milligrams per day of vitamin C? It's like which foods contain more of the nutrients you're finding harder to get in adequate quantities. And it's not just one nutrient, it might be 5 to 10 nutrients. So you're really looking at the cluster of nutrients and which foods and meals contain more of those. So, and then we've identified stretch targets which are well above that. You've got to keep in mind that these are the minimum to prevent diseases of deficiency. And if you're a well person eating a lot of raw beef, you're probably getting a lot of vitamin C from the blood and minerals from the blood and all those sorts of things. But the numbers vary as well. But it's really, let's look at the overall nutrient density. Let's not delve into the minutiae of the absolute amount you need, and that gets messy really quickly. But it just makes a whole lot more sense when you zoom back and look at, well, let's use this data as much as we can. Let's not over stress it too much, but let's just look at the foods that contain the nutrients you need more of. And if you prefer a plant-based approach, we can do that. If you prefer a carnivore diet, then we can do that as well, based on your current diet, to move it forward and progress it forward.
A lot of people ask me about how to make liver more tasteful and how to cook it or incorporate other organ meats on Carnivore. Optimal Carnivore can help you do just that with their grass-fed organ complex. It was created by carnivores for carnivores. They start by sourcing 100% grass-fed organ meats from New Zealand, gently freeze-drying the organs and encapsulating them into convenient bovine gelatin capsules. Just 6 of these capsules a day is the same as eating an ounce of raw organ meat. I personally take these every single day, as does my wife. Even though we both eat liver and other organ meats, our ancestors would have eaten the whole animal, and this unique blend has 9 different organs, including beef liver, brain, thymus, kidney, spleen, etc. And I think it's great to get a daily dose of these organs when you can. So it covers all your bases, whether you're at home or traveling. What's also cool is they plant a tree for every product sold, which helps the environment. So visit www.optimalcarnivore.com/carnivorecast and use the code carnivore10 to receive 10% off your purchase. Thanks, and back to the show. Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And I remember one individual talking about like not being attached to certain diets and not being dogmatic. Matthias Lindberg, I think he worked for the diet doctor.
Yeah.
And he was a bit disillusioned by the fact that, he was learning from you and some of these Facebook groups and from Ted Naiman, like the strength of nutrient density and the protein to energy ratio. And like, he thought he had this view that like carbs were strictly evil, and then evolved to say like, hey, if you're eating sufficient protein and you're really restricting the amount of foods that come from fat and carbs, like if you have a little bit more carbs, sometimes that can be more satisfying, and sometimes that's not the end of the world, if as long as you're keeping your total energy low. And he got like very frustrated with some of the dogma.
He quit Diet Doctor because of Ted and I, of what he'd learned.
Yeah, it's funny. It's a really funny story.
Yeah, it's intriguing. Yeah, but the carbs can definitely have a role for different people in different contexts. You look at Saladino at the moment, he's getting crucified for eating rice and honey, but you can imagine someone like him you can produce glucose from protein, but it's a slower process, and that's why it's really good for people who have got a lot of glucose floating around in their bloodstream. But if he's doing a lot of surfing and longer endurance sort of things where he needs to keep on pulling glucose, then it sort of makes sense that he needs that glucose from his diet, because he can't produce it quickly enough from the protein.
Yeah, totally. And like talking about this, and sometimes I think people will get frustrated with like you or the Keto Gains guys or Ted Naiman, because they're like, all you talk about is fat loss. All you talk about is like satiety and like, lowering your fat but like not everyone is just trying to lose weight. But
definitely.
I think, sometimes, and I have those thoughts myself, but a lot of us need to zoom out and realize that like 90% of the people out there do need to lose weight, and like type 2 diabetes and these problems are way more important than like the few of us who are like healthy and low body fat and trying to gain muscle. But I guess, who do you see as your target audience? And is it similar to like the keto gains? What I've found them say is like, surprisingly, most of their despite what some people may think initially, most of their clientele are like 30 to 60-year-old women who are overweight.
I suppose that's the typical Facebook audience as well, and typical people who are motivated to lose weight. So we get a fair share of those sort of people who are diabetic, and because I've been talking about insulin and blood sugars, and that's sort of my wheelhouse to an extent. A lot of the people who need to stabilize their blood sugars are in that ballpark and have tried keto and lost weight on keto, but then regained weight or they're stalled out on keto. But I suppose the system, really, the understanding the protein percentage drives satiety, enables you to dial down your calories by leveraging satiety, or dial up your calories by leveraging satiety. I suppose the current diet out there, the mainstream diet, most people are on 11 to 15% protein, and that just triggers them to be able to overeat the foods that are this combination of refined seed oils and the sugars and refined flours, a bunch of colorings and additives to make it look like they contain nutrients that they don't. So if you want to lose weight, you need to reverse that. But I suppose I've come to a point where, probably similar to you, you've been lean, I'd rather be strong than feel lean and weak. So you sort of need to find that balance point. And definitely when I'm active and lifting heavy, your body craves those energy dense foods, and you understand, the body automatically craves the yogurt and the peanut butter and all those sort of foods to give you an energy hit really quickly. And when you're trying to recover, you need that as well. So the way we've quantified satiety, it because 80% of people are trying to lose weight, that's how they generally use it. But understanding it also enables you to dial in a diet and select foods and meals for an athlete or someone trying to bulk, who they still need nutrients, but it's not going to be as nutrient dense a diet. But because they're eating 5,000 calories rather than 1,000 calories, it's going to be so much easier to get the nutrients they need in that, so they don't have to pack as many nutrients per calorie. So the system definitely works, and we've created 22 recipe books for different people with different goals, from protein sparingly modified fast to after you've lost weight, through sarcopenia with cancer, to try and help you to gain weight with that energy dense diet that still contains the nutrients you need. So we've tried to systemize it to target any goal, so it doesn't depend. Most people are trying to stabilize blood sugars or lose weight, but it doesn't have to be only that way.
Yeah. I love how you have both the recipe books and even further back, a lot of your food lists, as well as you can set the app for different goals, which is great. And talking about your latest project, Marty, can you talk a little bit about the book and keto myths, and maybe what are some of the biggest keto myths you hear about?
I suppose we called it Big Fat Keto Lies just to grab some attention. But I suppose as I went through the last 5 years of keto and low carb world, there's a lot of, like with any, you go from deities where you explain the sun and the moon with, some understanding of religious belief that it rains because you pray to the rain god. But we've scienced out a lot of those things for most people. They don't pray to the rain god to rain, but we really still have that sort of mythical belief in a lot of dietary approaches, and we sort of don't have deities, we have diets now, and they sort of have this religious fervor and zealotry, and the same, it's definitely the case with the keto world. And there's all these beliefs that I've gone along and, you tried your bulletproof coffee and you tried chasing ketones and you believed that if you had stable blood sugars and minimized insulin after you eat, you'd lose weight and you could eat fats, satiety and all those sorts of things. But, through my own trial and error and seeing a lot of people as they went through that over the last 5 years, I've found a lot of those things, they're sort of part truths, but when you take them to their extreme, they're not really all that, and they don't work out. So I suppose that whole thing of optimal ketosis is probably what we lead off with in the book. And, there's this sort of, Finney came up with this optimal ketone zone. If you get more than 0.5 millimole in your ketones, that was great. And if you had 3, that was even better. And, if you're metabolically healthy, you'd have, higher ketones, then everybody's there, chasing butter and cream and bulletproof coffee, trying to get high ketones in the pursuit of, this magical ketosis state. But, ketosis happens when you're losing weight when your body's going to autophagy over the long term and your body purges all those dead proteins. And just because you've got high ketones because excess energy from all the fat you're eating is backing up in your bloodstream, that's really a dangerous situation and is energy toxicity. So the whole optimal ketosis thing, and that there's a number that indicates you're in some magical state of ketosis that's beneficial is just a dangerous misunderstanding that I think really we need to move on from and acknowledge that, 0.5 or 1 on your ketone meter really doesn't tell you anything about whether you're healthy or not healthy, because it could be just you're loading up on exogenous ketones and too much dietary fat, or you could be losing in that early stage of losing weight. But we've seen again and again, even in the Verta trials over time, as people get more metabolically healthy, they have less energy toxicity. So they've got lower blood glucose, lower free fatty acids and lower ketones, as the energy isn't backing up in their bloodstream because their fat stores are full because they've exceeded the personal fat threshold. You see ketones actually decrease over time. So I think it's really important that people understand that, so they don't continue to go, I'm losing weight, my waist is getting better, I'm feeling great, I'm looking better. Everybody says, congratulations, but my ketones are dropping. What am I doing wrong? So that's our keto lie number 1. And then I suppose there's, fat to satiety, and you need to eat more fat to burn fat, and all those sorts of things that go around and around and around in keto world. And I thought, I can take the numbers and the analysis and say this is how it works based on our analysis to sort of, this is what I wish people had told me 5 years ago, that nobody gave me a clear answer, and I learned a lot from my friends and doing my own number crunching. So yeah, just trying to get it out there and share those insights.
Yeah, I'm super excited for the book.
Thanks for checking out the book. I think you actually read it through, and I sent it to you. So
yeah, it's super interesting. I thought the way you structured it was really smart, and I really like the structured approach to going through the different myths. And maybe building on that, what are some of the less common myths? But people who are more educated, who find your work, who find Ted Naiman, who are a little bit further down their journeys, who know, like more fat isn't always better, and
yep.
The goal isn't ketosis all the time, and insulin isn't the devil. Like, what are some myths that you think still persist for more people?
Yeah, I think as I've understood from watching my wife's blood sugars and insulin all the time, that most of the insulin that she requires or we all require is really just to hold your fat in storage. So 90% of Moni's insulin dose is just a basal insulin dose, and only 10%, because she's fairly low carb, is for the food she eats. So a lot of people are like trying to get these flatline blood sugars and minimize the insulin, and so they're swapping out the carbs for a whole lot of refined fat to keep insulin low, but they're just jammy and low satiety foods that don't give them a full signal, and they end up just getting bigger and bigger and more inflamed. And so I think that's one thing that, if I'm injecting you with an insulin needle, or Moni injects too much insulin, that's going to drive her blood sugars low, and she's going to become hungry, and she's going to eat more to satiate that hunger and bring her blood sugars up. But for everybody else who's not on an insulin pump injecting insulin, the insulin is just proportional to the amount of fat you're holding in storage. So the focus needs to come off insulin toxicity and move to energy toxicity and the amount of fat you're holding in storage. And the solution to that is high satiety foods that will help you lose weight and control your hunger without going insane. So I think that's one thing that people are still coming to grips with, that, insulin is not the enemy, and most of the insulin is from, just your liver trying to hold back this in storage your energy while you keep on eating low satiety fat foods. And the worst of those are the fat and carb combo, but, bulletproof coffee and fat bombs and all those other sort of things that people say, this will keep my insulin low. They don't over the long term. So, and I suppose just understanding nutrients per calorie as a measure of food quality, is sometimes a bit of a trip for some people and takes them a little while to get and understand.
Yeah, I think those are some great points. And maybe like some of the best posts I found from you are using the data, and a lot of your graphs are excellent, and I'll try to link to some of them in the show notes, but people should really check out Marty's blog for this, showing like the effect on satiety of different amounts of protein, carbs, fat, and examining that, thinking about like what is the difference between carbs and fat once we've met our protein requirements?
Yeah, I suppose just simply they're both energy. Carbs are more explosive, so you've got a little bit on board to help you when you need them. When you need quick energy, ideally you'll be burning fat most of the time. Healthier people are burning fat most of the time, but you may need a little bit of extra carbs to give you that boost when you need it. So yeah, not a lot. They're both energy, and when you combine them together, your body just goes nuts and says, "Give me more of those," because carbs and fats together, like a cookie, croissant, donut, are really rare in nature, and your body just goes, "Yeah, this is great. Winter must be coming. Give me more of that. I'm going to store fat."
Yeah, don't eat for winter.
I love the Sion's work is amazing. Just the concept that those fat carb combos are really rare in nature other than in autumn to prepare you for winter, but our whole food system is full of them these days.
Yeah, it's so true. We have a 10-month-old puppy, and she goes. We feed her a raw animal food diet, and she absolutely loves her tripe. When she gets a hold of some pizza in the park that someone's left over in a box somewhere, she goes absolutely nuts for it. And it's the same with people. Like you can be full up on 1,500 calories of lean meats and vegetables, but as soon as you have just a small taste of a donut, like it's incredible how many calories people can consume. And how about once we've met not only our protein requirements, but like protein and nutrient requirements? Let's say, you've hit maybe you haven't topped out the Nutrient Optimiser meter, but you've met most of your nutrient requirements for the day, and you've met a gram per pound of protein. What's the effect of having a lot more carbs versus a lot more fat on top of that? Or is it just kind of personal preference?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's personal preference. It's just the combo of the two that will blow your satiety, and you'll be able to eat a whole lot more. So yeah, if you look at the most satiating food is a plain cooked potato and cool. It's got this resistant starch, and most people don't eat excessive amounts of plain carbohydrate, very low fat foods by themselves. Neither do they eat a lot of excessive amounts of meat or lean meat by itself, but when you combine the two together, that's when you get into trouble. So if you keep them, I know Sian Foley actually keeps them separate. He'll have a carb meal in the morning and a protein fat meal in the evening, or that sort of thing where you alternate. And I think you're probably in an okay position if your blood sugars are reduced back down. You've emptied your fuel tanks, and you can choose to fill with one or the other. But combining two at the same time is just, never occurs in nature, and our satiety response goes wild for it.
Yeah, and something I've always wondered with the protein is people would be like, you see so much out there from Keto Gains folks, from Ted Naiman, like eat more protein, maximize your protein. No one's getting enough protein to energy ratio. And yep. I totally respect and understand that like the general American is not eating enough protein, but a lot of people following these folks and people listening to this podcast are very easily hitting a gram per pound of protein, like no effort. And back when I was very strict carnivore,
especially in the carnivore cast.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I was eating 350 grams of protein a day and 100 grams of fat, like pretty easily on carnivore. That was like a day of eating for me, maybe 100 and maybe up to 150 grams of fat. And, I think a lot of people in the carnivore community, by the way, think they're eating like more ketogenic ratios, quote unquote, of like 80% fat, 20% protein or somewhere close to it. But they're not accounting for the fact that so much of the fat cooks out when you grill a steak, when you cook it on the pan, when you cook it in your air fryer. And they're actually eating like a much higher, especially, in the parts of the carnivore community where they say eat to satiety, eat as much meat as you want. And these people are eating, 2, 3, 4 pounds of meat a day. They're way overshooting the gram per pound. So, is protein useful or practical after a gram per pound? How does protein break down? Protein to energy, like the theory of protein to energy, does it become less useful after this point of a gram per pound on satiety?
Yeah. I mean, if you're really active and lifting a lot and really pushing the needle, you'll just crave more protein. But if you're more sedentary and not as big and jacked, you probably won't be craving as much protein. And as you've seen in the charts, protein percentage just aligns with satiety. So if you're on a protein sparing modified fast, 50, 60, 70% protein will just give you a lower and lower spontaneous ad lib intake. But where I think people get tripped up is that just eating more protein tends to come with more fat, and they can quickly overdo the calories if that's not their goal. But like you're saying, most people who probably think that their steak they put on the barbie is 80% fat by the time they fry it. Actually, all the fat comes off in the cooking. They're probably not eating 80% fat. There might be 60% fat and 40% protein, which is incredibly satiating and incredibly hard to overeat. So, beyond a certain point, the protein will turn to glucose as required, which is not a problem. And especially older people who are insulin resistant are going to be losing protein to glucose with the elevated blood sugars, and actually need to top up, really focus on more protein. You look at the protein recommendations tend to be higher for older people because they're losing that protein through gluconeogenesis to blood glucose. So it's not avoid protein, but really focus on eating more protein to make up for that, so that they don't keep on eating it. But most people struggle to get too much protein. But if you're not getting the satiety fat loss results you want, then look at how much fat is coming along with that. And like the Keto Gains guys say, use it as a lever. If you need to gain weight, then, choose fatty cuts of meat and add butter and add whatever else that makes it taste amazing so you can eat more. But if you're trying to lose body fat, then dial back the added fat and the dietary fat, maybe even choose leaner cuts of that meat.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's just not like a great energy source at a certain point.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of protein. It's a really crap energy source because it's really hard to convert. You lose about 25% of the protein converting it to ATP, and your body just says, "Can we not do that? Give me the donut." I'd much rather go for the donut because that'll just go straight to energy and body fat. And protein is really a bad energy source.
Yeah. And like, what's your general take on carnivores, Marty? What have you learned from some longer term carnivores, like folks like Amber and Sean? And also maybe what have you learned from people in your group who've tried carnivore and then switched more to your suggested way of eating, including more nutrients from both animal and plant foods?
A lot of respect and a lot of value in the carnivore approach. I think I really rail against the whole plant-based thing that's going on at the moment. I really think it's eat more products of mass agriculture, and which is cheap, hyper-palatable, high-profit margin foods. And those foods are just incredibly low in bioavailable protein. Not just is it, low protein percentage, the bioavailability of protein from plant-based foods is really bad, especially when you're looking at eating a whole lot of grains or whatever. And so flipping that on its head and prioritizing animal-based foods just smashes your protein requirement. It's highly bioavailable, so you don't have to eat as many calories to get the protein you need. So it's no wonder people are having these amazing results when they flip the current dietary mantra on their head and focus on eating mainly meat. And it's a really good elimination diet approach. If you've got digestive issues, which a lot of people have, you can, switch straight back down to meat. I know at our house, I sort of encourage Moni to just eat steak for lunch, and then she eats dinner with us because she's got a lot of digestive issues, and that's really helped her and the blood sugars and insulin a whole lot more easy to control. And she's done quite well with it, even cutting out eggs and just prioritizing steaks. So I've pretty much encouraged her to try carnivore. But then at that point, you can say, well, what can I add back in to get some of those nutrients that may be harder to find? Do you add, do you tolerate a little bit of spinach, or do you tolerate a little bit of seafood, or do you like seafood? A lot of carnivore people don't, but it does provide a lot of those nutrients that are harder to find sometimes. But yeah, definitely a nutrient-dense diet tends to be somewhere on that spectrum between plant-based foods and animal-based foods. And so if you really want to optimize nutrient density, it tends to be better to have a mixture. And potentially another risk is that some people I see become quite fragile, that they just get Ella Bruce,
yeah,
she's a good friend, and she was even saying that she gets to a point where she gets a whiff of flour or whatever. She's so fragile after being carnivore for so long that really sends her into a spin. And there's a number of people like that become so fragile that they'll never be able to move on from eating meat only. So yeah, I mean, maybe treat it as an elimination diet and then consider adding a few nutrient-dense foods, which are not going to be those really highly inflammatory seed oils or sugars or grains anyway, because they're the least nutrient-dense foods.
Yeah. For me, I was what people would call a strict carnivore for 3 years. No cheat meals, no keto treats, hardly dairy ever. Almost just meat and organs. And, I found I went through a food reintroduction over the last year or so and was able to very slowly and systematically reintroduce foods, gradually increase I didn't tolerate fiber at all. I was, to your point, not very resilient and quite fragile with my digestion. But, keeping the base of animal foods and then layering things on top has worked really well for me and well for my wife as well.
Definitely.
I think that's a great approach.
Definitely a solid approach. And like I said before, the most nutrient-dense meals are mainly the energy is from meat or seafood, with some other things thrown on top to just fine tune the nutrient density.
And can we talk a little bit about meal timing and selection? Because I learned a lot from you and your data and your writing on this. I used to, at one point, was a huge fan of Martin Birkin and the lean gain style. Just have a big lunch, have a dinner. And this is still very popular in the carnivore community. People will do OMAD or they'll fast all day and have a giant meal. And I try to discourage people from that, partly because of what I've learned from you, and also, learning from others around circadian biology. But I'm ranting now. So what have you learned about meal timing and meal selection, and what seems to work the best for people?
Yeah, you've got to fit it in with your routine and your life. And if your dinner with your family is the most important thing, then having a social life and doing that is probably the most important thing. But yeah, it's definitely ideal to eat most of your calories when the sun is up and not be eating really late. Your insulin sensitivity changes, you're more insulin resistant, more likely to store food at night compared to eating it earlier in the day. 2 meals tends to be better than 1 meal. I think when you're having 1 meal a day and you're really hungry and trying to pack all your calories into 1 hour, what do you choose at that point? You don't go, I'll have the chicken breast and the broccoli or whatever, or you just go and give me calories, give me food now, and you just go for the most energy dense options, which are not necessarily going to be most satiating or nutrient dense if you're trying to lose weight. And definitely trying to front load your protein. We did analysis of 500,000 days of MyFitnessPal data, and definitely found that the people that had more of their protein for that first meal, it doesn't have to be necessarily at 5 a.m. maybe, whatever your first meal is at 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, 2 o'clock. But definitely if you front load your protein and then sort of backload carbs and fats if you need to. Some people sleep better when they have a little bit of carbohydrate at night. So it seems to work really a lot better to make sure that first meal is protein rich. And then the satiety kicks in, and you're not going to bed on this massive full stomach of a whole lot of energy you're trying to metabolize and burn off. And I mean, alcohol is probably the worst thing, but the protein's really hard to metabolize at night too. So if you're trying to work through this massive amount of protein you ate before you went to sleep, you're going to be struggling a little bit.
Yeah. I think that makes a ton of sense. And I'm sure people are wondering at this point, Marty, but
what the hell do you eat?
I'm curious myself. Yeah. How do you eat on a daily basis, weekly basis? What's the kind of a day of eating look like for you?
Yeah. So we have kangaroo here, which is basically a pest that gets culled and ends up in our shopping centre in Australia. So I really enjoy it. And it's basically a game meat that is really nutrient dense. You look at the nutrient profile, it's off the chart. Had crocodile once and looked at the profile of that. That was really incredible. But you can see how hunters and gatherers of the past would have had an amazing amount of nutrients from their wild game meat. But yeah, I try to, I'll have a fair bit of that at lunch, at work. I'll take salads and whack some canned tuna or mackerel or whatever, and sardines potentially on that for easy lunch. And I try to eat to prioritize for nutrient density and satiety, but then when you're active and lifting heavy, and I've been through that stage where I got quite lean and you feel weak and skinny and you'd rather be strong than skinny. So yeah, when I did deadlifts and squats the other day, and all of a sudden your body's just screaming out for energy dense foods. So at that point, it's you go to the protein powder or the dairy or the nuts. And if I don't prioritize the protein earlier in the day, and then I'm really active or lifting or walking a lot to work, you're in there with the peanut butter and the yogurt, which is, then you feel guilty for overdoing it. But there's definitely a role for those energy dense foods that can be as nutrient dense if you're trying to recover and get a lot of energy in. But most of the world is not very active and a lot heavier than they want to be. So yeah, you just need to find that right balance for you. And it's an ongoing learning process and challenge for me, but it's interesting to understand why the hell I'm craving these energy dense foods exactly to the number. And you go, yep, I'm obeying my biology.
Yeah. And I think that's important to recognize, like, you're still human. Like you have all this data, you have all this knowledge, but you can
very
combine
much
that with
my
the
lizard
intuition.
brain.
And like, what's great about that is, like, in any given situation, you can be like, man, I'm starving. Maybe I should load up on some Greek yogurt or some beef, lean beef before I go to town on peanut butter, or like, you can make these types of educated choices and have that toolkit with you outside of just having all the data in front of you, even, which is awesome. And to that point, one thing I was wondering is the goal, or can people kind of graduate from tracking forever, or do people follow your system without tracking forever, yourself included, at any time?
Yeah. So there's definitely a value in tracking, because you can understand what you're currently eating. You can then say what foods will complement what I'm currently eating in terms of macros and micros. And we have a system with the Nutrient Optimiser and the masterclass where we look at finding your optimal 30-30. So the 30 foods and the 30 meals that work for you most of the time. Look at what you're currently eating, audition some new foods and meals, and add those in. And then the masterclass and Nutrient Optimiser use quantitative numbers to guide that and guide those choices. But we learnt pretty early on that most people don't want to track their food forever. They don't want to track their food full stop. So we made a bunch of food lists and recipe books. We've got 22 recipe books that say these are the most nutrient dense recipes for, if you want to be keto, or you want to do a protein sparing modified fast, or cancer, or even we said plant-based peeps need nutrients too. So we did one for that market as well. But there's definitely, you need to retrain your habits, and then you can get on with living life, and what works for you. And if ever you need to go back, you can go back and monitor and track and fine tune. But yeah, definitely you want to form new habits and find the new routine that works for you for the long term.
Yeah. And Marty, one thing I'm curious, you're always learning, you're always testing things. What's
always
something
making mistakes?
What's something you've changed your mind about recently with regards to nutrition?
Yeah, I suppose that is coming from the blood sugar insulin, trying to flatline my blood sugar, my wife's insulin. I thought flatline blood sugars were optimal, and more stable was better. And then I realized, you go to all these people wearing CGMs and drinking the bulletproof coffee, and it's not getting them there. And I'm doing that. And I came to a point where I realized that satiety, nutrient density, and really the pre-meal blood sugars is the most important thing for most people. If the goal is to lose body fat, you just need to deplete your fuel tank and validate your hunger with the blood sugars before you eat. And we've had a lot of people going really well with that, with their data-driven fasting approach lately. And it's real thrilled to see that going off. People pricking themselves to understand whether they need to eat or not. But that's been really cool. But yeah, as you say, not everybody comes to nutrition because of weight loss, but a lot of people do. So that seems to be a really good hack for those people. Yeah.
And Marty, this has been an absolute pleasure and honor to finally get you on the show.
Thanks,
where can people find the book, find you, follow you, learn more about your work? And of course, I'll link to everything at carnivorecast.com.
Yeah, the book is Big Fat Keto Lies. I'm going to start doing some live chats about that and interviews talking about it. I've got a Optimizing Nutrition blog. I've even got a carnivore section of the blog with 3 different posts, one analysing Saladino's diet and Sean Baker and just a general carnivore chat. We've also got Nutrient Optimiser. We've got a bunch of food lists, including for carnivore people and carnivore people with weight loss and non-weight loss. And then you can do a a tracking challenge as well if you wanted to track your food for a while, work out what nutrients you need more of and what foods contain those. So yeah, thanks so much for having me on. It's been real fun.
Excellent. Yeah. Thank you, Marty. It's been great. Really learned a lot today. Continue to learn from you. And I think my listeners will too. So thanks again for your time.
Hey, thanks, Scott.
If you enjoy the show, please consider supporting the Carnivore Cast on Patreon. By becoming a patron, you'll help us reach more people and continue to create content on carnivore. There are also exclusive perks available, such as private Q&As, consultations with me, and more. Become a supporter at patreon.com/carnivorecast. Check the episode description for the link. Thank you, and I'll see you there. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Carnivore Cast. If you enjoyed this episode, please review on iTunes. It really helps us out. And share it with a friend. What questions would you like answered, or who would you like to hear from in the carnivore research community? You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at CarnivoreCast, or go to carnivorecast.com. You can also email me at info@carnivorecast.com. I'd love to hear from you. Until next time, keep it carnivore.